I did 1 year at UH Manoa. I will just be honest, I completely failed. Deep sea mining is better than terrestrial mining because the ocean is isolated. No one lives there. We are people of the ocean. We live here, sir. The benefits are hypothetical as well, but the consequences are very much real.
Welcome to another episode of Dear Suga. I'm so excited because we have an amazing woman that is making headlines. Sabrina Suluai-Mahuka. I am so excited to have this conversation with you today. So who is Sabrina?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sabrina. I am a Pago girl here in American Samoa. My mom is full Filipino. My dad is Samoan Chinese. And so growing up with that blend of cultures, a lot of discipline, it's a lot of family first. And so that has really shaped who I am as a person. And now as a mother, I'm trying to ingrain that same set of values for my daughter.
You're valedictorian for your year. Your path was not, I would say, a normal valedictorian path. Do you mind if you could share a little bit? Just because I think it'd be inspiring for someone.
You know, when you're in high school, you're under your parents' watch 24/7. And so you don't really have a choice but to do well, right? And so it's a lot of external influence saying you need to bring home your A's. And so that really pushed me through high school and was able to be honored as a co-valedictorian. My older sister, she's a year ahead of me. She went straight into the Air Force Academy. I think she was the first one for American Samoa to do that. And so obviously that played a big role. And I'm like, oh my gosh, do I have to go to the Air Force Academy? But the biggest thing was just having college paid for. And so right after high school, I did accept an ROTC scholarship for the Air Force. I did 1 year at UH Manoa. I will just be honest, I completely failed. I didn't have that discipline ingrained. I was so used to having my parents say, no, you can't do this or, study at this time. And so I also don't have the capacity to breathe and run at the same time. So I don't know why the Air Force was an option for me. And so came back home, went to ACC, and I really have an appreciation for community college because it sets you up so that you can be independent. Also, not just with your values and your practices and discipline, but also financially, right? You can rely on financial aid, get some scholarships to build up. Came back home, did my AA, and jumped into the bachelor's program with UH Manoa, where we were able to have that here on island. And then just kept pushing forward from bachelor's to master's and got my doctorates. I will say, I don't think I ever want to go back to school again. But I'm happy it's done. So yeah, that's been the journey. Is I needed to fail first to understand how important education was for me, and because we do stem from a history of educators in our family, I wanted to make sure that I upheld how we grew up, and that's been the journey.
I think it's a beautiful journey because majority of the time we're always aiming to go off island, whether it's going to be in the military or in college. But I reflect back and I'm like, man, I should have taken more advantage of the education that was back home. Even for myself, I felt so lost when I went into college that was one of the reasons why I decided to go into teaching because I was like, I never want someone to feel the way I did with trying to
Yes,
go to school.
exactly.
Yeah. Being a teacher isn't easy. And I'm sure having to witness your mom go through teaching, she's had her own set of accolades, being territorial teacher of the year herself, and then you as well. But having seen that, I would have thought it discouraged you from going into teaching, but it sounds like it motivated you to go even more.
Also a funny story because after high school, I was like, oh, I want to be a marine biologist. I want to take care of dolphins. But that didn't work out because I didn't know how to do that career pathway, taking the right classes and everything. And so when I came back to ACC, there were limited classes. So my parents would just say, just get your AA in liberal arts. So did that. But at the same time, when you grow up in a house with a teacher, you are also their assistant. So you help with the grading, you help put together bulletin boards, you put together their tests and everything. So I already knew how to do that. And so when I graduated, my parents said, just try it out. It's a job at the time. And if that's something that you don't like, then you can always change your mind later. I ended up loving it.
So you did go into teaching, which is super awesome. And then you went to Samoa after Fasao. At the same time, you also founded Finafinau. And it's kind of interesting because you just said one of the passions that you've had since growing up was marine biology. And so was this sort of like a way that you tried to blend your love for the ocean?
I feel like this is a common theme I'm seeing. It was actually by accident. There was a flyer going around the school and it specifically said for science teachers lectures, and it was for an indigenous program that was hosted in West Virginia. And it was talking about like stewardship. It was talking about indigenous folks. And my students came to me. I was teaching English at the time, saying they wanted help with their essay portions, their application. And I was like, go to your science teacher. That's what the flyer says. Fortunately, they said their science teachers weren't available to help them. I said, okay, fine. Come here. I can help you. So we did that. They were accepted. I didn't know at the time I guess I didn't read into it. If your students are accepted or a majority of them are accepted, then you also accompany them as a mentor. And it was in West Virginia, out of all places, that we were like, why are we talking about stewardship? We're talking about indigenous peoples and taking care of our land and the ocean here. And we need to do these conversations at home and really work with our community. And so that's where Finafinau was really born. It was just thinking we can do this. And the idea of resilience with our youth was really what pushed it forward. So coincidentally, yes, now we're able to combine those passions for environment and education.
That's super awesome. It's interesting, even now, how it's sort of evolved over time. When I had service starting and we had worked with EPA and the coastal cleanup, I was always surprised at how much trash we constantly find. It's crazy because it's like, okay, this wasn't here the last time we did a cleanup. You would think that that would leave the beach clean, but you have to constantly go back to clean up. So where do you think that lies? Is it more like from the land itself, or is it from the ocean?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we have to continuously clean up, and it stems from a personal mindset. We are the ones who are here, and so we should be in charge of doing away our trash properly, or at least trying to minimize our trash. A lot of the times, picking up your bottles, we're picking up cigarette butts. We do EPA cleanup, so with the monitoring
Mhm.
sheets, which makes the cleanups 2 times longer because we have to log down each single piece of trash that we pick up. But it's good because they can use that data to ban things like how they did with styrofoam. They used Finafinau's data. And so we need to change our mindset. Just because there's no trash can doesn't mean that the ground is a trash can, right? And so it's really just encouraging people. This is our home. We should be the ones taking care of it, not the ones ruining it. And so we have to work with this generation. So hopefully, when they're adults, they don't continue the same bad habits and they can teach their children to just nip it in the bud. It's really important we get everyone out there to see what we're doing to our home. And
Yep.
so we need to all work together.
That's a great organization that you formed. We're planning to have the podcast out on World Ocean Day. I'm curious as to what was your first memory of the ocean and what did that specific moment feel for you?
So I can't remember how old I was, but I think my first memory of the ocean was at Fatima Futi. That's the iconic place for families to go. And we grew up with an appreciation for family time. So my parents would take us to the beach. We would have the Pritchard bread sandwiches, and then you put your chips inside. It was probably like bongos or something. But that was such an amazing time for us to really just enjoy ourselves, living on an island, being a child, and just laying on the sand when there was still sand on that side of Fatima Boutique. And that's something that I want to hold close to me because you don't need money to share that enjoyment with your family. Those early on memories, just spending time with family, spending time on an island, surrounded by the ocean, and literally no care in the world, eating my bongo sandwich.
So I'm curious as to that memory. How has that shifted for you now? You just mentioned that there's hardly any sand in Fatuma Futsi. Now that you have your own daughter, how are you able to give her that same experience that you've had?
That area specifically it's still there. There's not a lot of sand unless it's extremely low tide. So we have to take her to the other side of Fatima Futi, which I think is still an experience. I want my daughter to grow up being used to going to the beach, lazing around on the sand, lazing in the ocean, and just appreciate that we have such a beautiful home to call home.
I love that you shared that experience with your daughter. So I want to also address another elephant in the room. You've been in the news a lot lately.
Yeah. Um, on purpose, sometimes not on purpose, a lot of the times.
The next subject we're going to talk about was deep sea mining, but I just want to take it off just so people can understand so we can just move past it and talk about what really matters. I think it was last year you were appointed as executive director of the American Samoa Resilience Office. there was a change that happened earlier in the year. What do you want to say about that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I applied for the position just because I thought it was a good way to combine my passions with environment and education. I've been working at the grassroots level for the longest time, so seeing how we could maybe bridge grassroots and policy and governance. So that was my motivation for being part of ASRO, the American Samoa Resilience Office. Unfortunately, I was terminated, and that
Mhm.
was not part of my 5-year plan. At the same time, it might have been for the best because now I can continue doing the work without a lot of the red tape that government does bring to it, and so especially with deep sea mining, we are doing this on a volunteer basis, and so I probably wouldn't have as much leeway as I would if I was still remaining in government.
As much as it is, I think there's a path there, and it's probably a blessing when one door closes, another one opens. And so I definitely want to jump into deep sea mining ever since last year when I saw it being signed and everyone was like, oh, this is a great thing for us. At first, I thought it was a good thing because I was coming from a point of view of overfishing. And some people, they actually go dark just so that they can go fish in areas they're not supposed to be fishing in. When I heard that, I was like, oh, great. This is actually going to protect our resources. Knowing who the president is, there's always a catch to something. There was so many other things brewing underneath. I had to do my own little research as to
Yeah.
why it's been so important. So, what was your initial thought when you heard that too?
Deep sea mining was introduced to me in Hawaii for a gathering of ocean folks. I didn't realize that American Samoa would be first on the chopping block. So at the time of these conversations, I was just getting a small grasp of what that would look like, thinking this doesn't make sense in terms of what deep sea mining is, and it
Mhm.
doesn't seem helpful. And then like a year later, then American Samoa was, put into the center of this conversation. I was able to kind of have a little bit more time to grasp what the concept instead of like how most folks in American Samoa where they were just like boom in your face. You didn't really have time to digest information. It was just we need to get comments in for the RFI period. We need to do this, we need to do that. It was just a lot of information for folks to absorb all at one time. And so I'm grateful for platforms where I'm able to meet with other folks in the Pacific so that I can understand some of these detrimental practices that are being proposed for the Pacific.
Could you talk a little bit what exactly is a deep sea mining and what that actually looks like?
What's being proposed in deep sea is that there's all these critical minerals or rare minerals that can be used to supply solar batteries or even military developments. So there's nodules, there's seamount vents, potentially having cobalt, manganese, nickel in them.
Mhm.
And so folks are thinking, hey, this could definitely boost our economy, it fuel the lifestyle that everyone's used to because some of these batteries can be in our cars, they can be in our phones. And so folks are thinking this might be the next big thing. They take millions of years to form though. So it's not something that can just regrow once we do start picking up these nodules or scraping the seafloor for these seamounts or these vents. Yeah.
It's interesting because I was trying to prepare for our interview. And so I need to educate myself more about this. They're talking about, oh, the Amazon are the lungs of the earth. But I think science has shown that 50%
Yes.
comes from the
Yeah.
ocean. And going back to just these nodules, they're like potato apples that are sitting at the floor of the ocean. And there's something to do with oxygen that even scientists are still trying to understand what is going to happen to our planet when we're actually going to mine these things. So many things, right? But let's talk about what they're saying. This is going to be so much more better for the environment than land mining. What do we say about that?
Science kind of speaks for itself, right? For these nodules, they have been shown to produce dark oxygen. And so, yes, we want to plant trees. Oh, that's super important. But we also have to factor in how much of our oxygen comes from the ocean and how these nodules or these vents play into that ecosystem. And so, for deep sea mining versus terrestrial mining, we did have someone, name is Scott Vincent, who had presented trying to showcase, hey, deep sea mining is better than terrestrial mining because the ocean is isolated. No one lives there. And that I think it didn't land well. Like you need to read the
Hmm.
room. We are people of the ocean. So it's not isolated. We live here, sir. And if they do mine the deep sea, it's not going to stop terrestrial mining. If anything, it would probably cause terrestrial mining the conditions to become worse because they're trying to compete with that
Yes.
supply chain. And
Hmm.
so do I support terrestrial mining? No, but I also don't support deep sea mining. And, the communities around these areas, they're the ones that are going to be affected. They are affected. And so environmentally, no. And do we need deep sea mining? No, because they've already done studies to showcase if we just recycled, if we focused all of this energy on a circular economy, those minerals are already existing on land. It's
Yes.
not urgent for us to mine the deep sea.
And it just kind of gives way to how much we're consuming it, right? It's
Yes.
be more cognizant of what you're using. So I think it's just educating not just our community, but everyone as a whole. I'm trying to figure out the best way that I can segue into it. One of the things that recently came up is a document that was circulating earlier in May. And I kind of go, wait, I'm a little confused now because I thought we were against it. Are we working together to make this thing happen? So where does it stand? Where has it landed now? Because I feel like it's evolving.
Yeah, that document, interesting, was labeled towards the cabinet members. But if you read the document, the language really does showcase kind of a position where we're preparing to mine the deep sea and we're preparing to almost do away with our opposition for deep sea mining. And if we look at the documents that have gone out from the government side, the only opposition really was the resolution that the FONO had passed. Other than that, our opposition for this current administration has not been as strong. Having that kind of letter for a steering committee was quite interesting because nothing else was put out from the executive branch for deep sea mining. So, yes, I thought that was quite interesting. And I think folks saw that as well to say, we can put together a steering committee, but we've had X amount of time to try to put together regulatory framework, put together safeguards, put together an actual moratorium. We do have an executive order for a moratorium, but that can be recalled by the governor at any time, like any executive order.
Mm.
So if they put all that time to put together a steering committee, they can still have time to put together safeguards for American Samoa.
One of the things that caught me off guard is like rescue revenue sharing subcommittee, the infrastructure subcommittee. There is something about monitoring the federal government. I was like, how do you do that? Like how
Yeah.
like if it's deep sea mining, how do you independently do that? Because even the people that are going in to try and mine these things, it's taken them millions and billions of dollars
Yeah.
just to go down there. So how do you independently do that so that you're not looking at the same report to be objective about this and make sure that this is actually for the well-being of the community?
It's also interesting for if we're talking about revenue sharing, right? Those are
Mhm.
conversations that, yes, if the federal government decides to push forward, we should have some sort of framework in place. That's a conversation that should be done with our executive branch and our funnel
Mm.
because we need to work together for this. But if we actually look at the market, deep sea mining is not profitable at this time. One, you kind of mentioned it already. We're talking about folks who need to build a technology. For example, with Impossible Metals, they're one of the loudest ones to say that they want to take over, the mining for American Samoa. They don't even have the technology right now to do that at a commercial scale. And I think that's the same for like the metals company. And when they were in the hearings for congressional briefings, it would come from the taxpayers to build their technology to mine our ocean floor. So it's coming from our
Yeah.
pockets if that's the case. And then at the same time, they're talking about like for possible metals, 1% of the profit they were graciously willing to donate. Profit we know comes after paying their investors, paying the technology, paying their contractors. It can be 1% of potentially almost nothing. And that's again the market trend. It's moving away from these minerals because there's other options like lithium phosphates that can be used that are more effective, cost effective, and don't deal with destructive industries. And also, so many companies, like even Google, have shared that they won't even use these minerals that are from the deep sea. And so, is it profitable? Maybe as like a Ponzi scheme, folks at the very top, the
Mhm.
executives and investors in American Samoa, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, these are what they're projecting because there's investments going into the project, and you're telling me the islands are getting 1% of this whole profit, and they're the ones that are going to be most affected. Gosh, this hit hard. Someone had posted that they see the boats around the island, and they're just moving at a pace that I was not expecting this to be happening anytime soon. But with the way that things are progressing, I'm truly worried about that.
When BOEM, DOI agency that's in charge of deep sea mining. When they first approached us, they were sharing, don't worry, this is a 3 to 5 year process. We're on part A of the process. Now we're at part B. We're halfway through already, and it's been a year. And
Yeah.
so it was really a lot of underselling how fast moving this process would be. And now there's a projection of the lease being given out in August, but from their mouths and themselves, they said it's a 3 to 5 year process. So I just thought that was so deceitful for them to say.
I don't know where to start right now because there's just so much I've learned so far that it makes me go, what is happening? I was looking at the Clarion-Clipperton Zone. It's what Hawaii is fighting for. And it's so interesting how many countries are trying to take over these areas. Countries like Korea, Japan, like Germany, all within the zone. And it's interesting too because then I learned something. Is it ISA?
Yeah,
The
the
ones that
International Seabed Authority.
Yes. So the ISA, they're supposed to be controlling these zones and then having a sponsoring country, which is supposed to be a developing country. So I saw names like Tonga, Nauru, and Cook Islands as some of those that are for deep sea mining. You're taking an active role and connecting hopefully with more Pacific Islanders. What are their stand on this, knowing that some of our islands are willing to participate?
And I think that's been an interesting conversation because we have to look at government versus civil society. And I think that's the same case for Tonga and Cook Islands. We have government who may be supportive of it. They're looking at economic developments, diversifying their economy. But the civil societies from Cook Islands and Tonga, from what I understand, talking to folks, is they're against deep sea mining, right? And so they're not in full agreement.
I think that's what's going on right now with
Yeah.
American Samoa.
Yes, absolutely. I think so too. And for Nauru, already messed up part of the ocean, right, with phosphate mining. And
Mhm.
from what I understand, they should not even be eating the fish that are in their waters. If there's health severities that are associated with it, like if you're a Pacific Islander and you can't even eat your own fish, you can't even swim in your own ocean without thinking about the health factors that are going to come in, that's alarming and extremely sad. And that's not something that we take lightly. And I think that's for all
Mhm.
Pacific Islanders. And so that's why there's so much caution to say, hold on, there's a lot that we know about deep sea mining, and a lot of it's not positive, but there's a lot that we don't know, and we should not be rushing into it. Yeah.
Yes. It's crazy. I get the economic side of it and how we're trying to find ways to survive at the same time as people trying to be stewards of the ocean. It seems like there's so much happening at the same time. I feel like I'm going on a tangent just because there's so many ways that we can go through it. But is there something particular that is currently happening right now that maybe we should be a little bit more aware of?
I think right now, particularly for the American Samoa community, the process for BOEM is supposed to have completed a NEPA review. And instead of an environmental impact study, which is more comprehensive, they're doing an environmental assessment. Personally, I think that we should be demanding for an environmental impact study because an environmental assessment, that's someone making a decision about our ocean for generations, and it's a desk study, a decision at their desk. I don't think that's fair at all for the community. In addition, whenever that comes back, the environmental assessment, we have 90 days to respond. And when I say we, I mean the governor. He is the only one that can provide that feedback to say, nope, this is not enough for you to move forward in this process, or we want, X, Y, and Z safeguards in place if the process is to move forward, or, this is the framework that our government has put together. This is something that we would consider to be safe and beneficial to American Samoa. And so, yes, we have 90 days. I don't think those 90 days have started. I'm not quite sure because I'm not in government anymore, but it's not open for public comments. It's only open for a local government to federal government. And that's also unfortunate because it's such a large scale decision. We're talking about if a lease is given, it's a minimum of 20 years. And if mining does happen, it can be extended beyond that. So it's a generational decision, and there are no regulations in place to separate what would be a lease for exploration and a lease for exploitation. And so one of the things that BOEM had said why it's an environmental assessment, which, is a
Mhm.
shortcut, is because it's for preliminary activities. But if there's no regulations in place to separate exploration between exploitation, then how does that justify meaningful community engagements? For oil and gas, I believe, or for like even wind development, they had public hearings and community briefings. They're not doing that for this process. They're actually just cutting the process down. And now we're here a year later, almost more than halfway done.
Yeah, I learned that the US isn't part of the ISA.
Yes.
And that's how Trump has been able to find this loophole to get into deep sea mining. So
Yes.
the fact that this project is accelerated, it means it's time to take action. I'm hoping that I could help disseminate to help people understand it a little better. I was just thinking about now that I live out here in California, for someone going through their day, I don't want to say that we're removed, but we have our own set of problems having to go through life. And we go to work and we come back and we're just trying to get through our day. What can I do to help with this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that's been a concern for a lot of folks, with our diaspora community or even just folks who are not Pacific Islanders. Like, how does this affect them? Whatever happens in the Pacific Ocean, right? Whether it's around American Samoa or around the Cook Islands, the effects are not going to be limited to geopolitical boundaries. Like, for example, with our tuna, that is our biggest export. Tuna is migratory. And so if deep sea mining happens, we're going to be eating those toxins. Or are we even going to have any tuna left with all the negative effects of deep sea mining? Seafood, all of it, it's going to be contaminated. So for folks in American Samoa, folks in California, folks around the world, if you really like eating that seafood,
Yep.
we should be concerned about deep sea mining. That's a whole source of, food security that may be jeopardized. And if we can't eat seafood, of course, we're going to have to figure out, okay, let's focus all our attention on things that we can grow or things that can be, farms or livestock. But not everyone, well, physically can do that, but also thinking about the price, thinking about the feasibility of just focusing or just relying on those types of food sources. There's a lot of people to feed. Even locally, fishermen and families rely on what we can get from the ocean. Jeopardizing that, it would be through deep sea mining. There's just no positives right now or safeguards to say that deep sea mining wouldn't jeopardize our whole livelihoods.
Going back to that conversation we had about land mining versus deep sea mining, when we think of mining in any sort of fashion, it's like them picking up all these rocks and then eventually having to take it up to the surface. There's blooms there where it's like pollution in the air now going down to pollute the ocean. So even though you might not see it, there is an effect, like you said, on our food supply. How is that going to look like?
Yeah. The traditional way of deep sea mining is they basically vacuum up these
Hmm.
nodules and then it would create sediment plumes in the midwater column. And that's where a lot of our marine life, actually, nurseries, habitats, or coral reefs, which are deemed as an asset for American Samoa. And so you're thinking about all of that actual physical disturbance and noise pollution, light pollution. We really don't know how this is going to affect all of the ocean, or at least what we do know, it's not a positive outlook. And even for impossible metals, they're saying that their technology would eliminate the midwater plume. But if they're picking, right, their one prototype that they had, they did a study where it showcased their disturbance with their picking would be 23,000 times faster than the natural rates of disturbance in the deep sea. 23,000 times more. And when I brought that up to them, to their CEO, Oliver, he said, we didn't say that there wouldn't be any disturbance. We said that we would be eliminating the midwater plumes. So it's very strategic with what information they're sharing. And to understand that though, that's not at commercial scale. That was with their one prototype. So we can't even imagine a whole fleet of these prototypes disturbing and picking up these nodules. So I can't even imagine what our ocean life would look like with all that disturbance.
There's just so much in the Pacific that's happened. Colonialism. I think Bikini Island, if nobody knows, that's where the word bikini comes from, even though it has nothing to do with it. There's so much radiation. It's taken so long for it to recover. And this isn't the first time they're talking deep sea mining. They've done this in the 70s and even studies till now, it has not recovered at all. So
Yeah,
what
no.
makes them think that this somehow is going to be somewhat different?
Some of the argument is like, oh, we've advanced so much with technology. I agree we have it advanced, but nowhere near the capability of making sure that this is a safe industry. So a lot of it is hypothetical. The benefits are hypothetical as well, but the consequences are very much real. And so even thinking about like folks that have been affected by phosphate mining or nuclear pollution, like the Marshall Islands, what reparations have been made to their communities for these long-term effects? And do we have something in place for us? If mining does go through, how can we continue to live our lives safely, healthy, our livelihoods economically, financially? So there's a lot there that it just showcases we're not ready to dive into this industry, extremely destructive right now.
Um, I appreciate you really advocating, and I know it's out of your own time. I'm curious because I watch social media. I feel like no one's really talking about this. How are some ways that you're able to connect just so that we can have that message more out there?
I am thankful that there are like minded folks who are here on the ground willing to volunteer. We also have allies around the nation and actually around the globe who have been extremely helpful, providing information and streamlining how can we take, this to the next step. And so I've been working with folks from the Sustainable Ocean Alliance, National Ocean Protection Coalition, Pacific Island Heritage Coalition, like all these ocean folks who are advocating, and I'm learning a lot from them. I'm working with folks here on the ground to really move community. I'm actually an introvert, and so it takes a lot for my social media to talk to people, but we have
Yeah.
people here on the ground who are willing to do that, and that's been very helpful. There's a group here called Fa'asao America Samoa, and they're working with Earthjustice to really look at the legal side. So I'm happy that they're tackling that. So we're working with the churches here to really get the information out because word of mouth and social media, and it's just a matter of we have to use our own networks. I might not know everyone, but someone else might know maybe a social media influencer, or they know someone here in the government space, or they know someone here in the federal space where we can work together to oppose deep sea mining. And so it's really saying we can't leave it to someone else to do the work. We can all lead in our own ways and all support each other in our own ways. We can't just wait and say, happy to support you, which is great. I appreciate that. But I really think this is time for all of us to take the lead. And so if there's like outreach to our elders, outreach to our youth, I'm happy to support your community. If you're doing a town hall, I can volunteer. But folks can definitely take measures into their own hands to take the lead in opposing deep sea mining.
I appreciate you sharing that. My platform is still growing and it's very infant stage, but I want to do as much as I can. I do commend you for the work you're doing and being such an amazing woman, not only using your voice to amplify what is happening in our communities and also to stand up for yourself using your way of having to get your side of the story out, which is such an amazing thing. The purpose behind your singer for me, there are times where it felt like a crab in a bucket where it feels like when someone is trying to get up, it's just like someone's trying to pull you down. And the circle that I have, and I wish more women, I know there's more women out there that are just trying to uplift each other up. If you're doing great in your space, I can do great. We can all do great together. And so, what are your thoughts and what are some advice that you could give to someone out there who wants to feel empowered or do what you do?
That is a tough one, but I really like why you started this podcast and this journey. I think it's really important for women to be empowered. And one thing, it's such a cliche, right?
Hmm.
Empower people. But I truly believe that if we're in a space where we can encourage others, we should. If we're in a space where we can uplift, then we should. I think that is something that we need to make sure is a mindset because if you're doing well, if she's doing well, they were all doing well. And it's not a competition where we should be tearing each other down. No, I'm happy to see other folks going about their own path and succeeding in what they're passionate about because that's really the goal. We cannot lead alone. And if we invest in our own communities that we're all leaders, that's really how we succeed as a people is that we can divide divide and conquer. You do well in this space, I do well in this space. Can we work together somehow to, amplify our passions or our working goals? Yeah, that is a goal. We need to make sure that we're not seeing each other as competition. We're not seeing where we're just nitpicking and picking out people's flaws. We're seeing how we can uplift and support.
I love that. I've seen a lot of posts where your mom is one of your biggest role models, but feel free to share if there's other people. But what is something she has taught you that has really made a big difference in your life?
I will just be honest, I am the hot-headed one in my family. I've always been known to speak my mind, but it's been a journey as an adult to learn how to speak it in a way where I'm still upholding my values that I was raised on and for my parents. They've taught me to make sure that whatever we do, it always comes back to your family name, it comes back to your village. And so we're representing more than ourselves. And so I have to think now as an adult, whatever I say, am I doing justice to how my parents raised me? Am I doing justice to being a Pago girl? Because I am so prideful when it comes to that. And so that's what I think about when I do speak publicly. And my mom specifically has raised me to always be an independent woman. She has always instilled the idea that we should not be relying on anyone else to achieve our goals or on anyone else to support us. That's great if we do have that in our lives. And, I do. At the same time, we can do it ourselves. And so that's the mindset that I have. It's like, if I can do it, I can do it. If I need support, then I can ask for support, but I know most of the time I can work independently. It's one thing is to learn when to speak up and know that you should speak up. If there is an injustice that's happening, or if you think that maybe you're being mistreated or you don't agree with the direction maybe a project is going in, speak up. You don't have to be the loudest in the room. You don't have to use harsh words, but you can make sure that your point is carried across. That showcases that you're standing up for a reason. And usually that's aligned with your values.
I appreciate that. And I think there's been parts of my life where I forget that sometimes, but it's a good reminder. Definitely not a perfect person, but for sure, it's good to always be reminded of the great things. And now, in this season of your life, I know you've got a lot going on, but what is it that you do to unwind and come back to yourself?
Yes. So for me on my free time, really like self-care. So you'll find me on a Sunday. Like I have a lot of Korean and Japanese products for my face. I like getting my nails done because if I feel good about myself, then I know that my mind will be clear. I read a lot. And so anime, it has also been a very prominent part of my life right now because that's how I de-stress. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to watch this guy level up. And I'm like, okay, I can do the same.
I appreciate your time. And so, if people wanted to reach out and learn a little bit more and where they can help, how would they be able to find you?
I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm happy to also connect through email if folks are really interested. Happy to take on volunteers as well. I am reachable. It might take me a few days to respond because I just need to charge my social battery. I don't like calls because it gives me anxiety. So yes, messages are perfect for me. But yeah, that's how I can be reached.
So, thank you again, Sabrina, for taking your time today. You are inspiring. You've done such an amazing job. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm here to support any way that I can. Thank you again for being part of Dear Sunga. If this conversation stirred something in you, I invite you to share what stood out. If you know another Sunga who would benefit from this conversation, please share this with them. Let's continue the dialogue with openness and care. I look forward to welcoming you in the next episode. With all my alofa and mana, yes, soy full of maia manuia.